London, February 19, 1996. The cavernous Earl's Court Exhibition Centre buzzed with anticipation as the cream of British music gathered for the annual BRIT Awards. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, champagne fumes, and the electric energy that only comes when music royalty assembles under one roof. Camera flashes erupted in rhythmic bursts, catching the glint of sequins, the shine of polished awards, and the radiant smiles of artists celebrating their craft. This was Britain's biggest night in music, broadcast to millions, a showcase of talent and spectacle. But nobody could have predicted how this particular evening would unfold, or how a carefully choreographed performance would spiral into one of the most controversial moments in award show history. The audience had settled into a comfortable rhythm of awards, speeches, and performances when the stage went dark. A hush fell over the crowd. The familiar opening notes of Michael Jackson's song about environmental consciousness began to drift through the speakers. The king of pop was not just performing tonight. He was bringing his grandest vision to the BRIT Awards stage. For weeks, rehearsals had consumed the venue, with Jackson's team transforming the space into a theatrical masterpiece. The production would be immense. A gospel choir, professional dancers, elaborate props, and visual effects. Jackson had prepared something special, something meant to move hearts and awaken consciences. The lights slowly illuminated the stage to reveal Michael standing alone, a solitary figure dressed in flowing white. His silhouette was unmistakable, slim, graceful, powerful in its stillness. As the music swelled, the audience watched in silent awe. This was no ordinary performance. Michael had created a narrative about Earth's suffering and humanity's indifference. Around him, dancers portrayed the struggling victims of war, famine, and environmental devastation. The staging was dramatic and intentionally provocative. Michael cast as a messianic figure bringing healing and awareness. His voice soared through the venue, raw with emotion, each note carrying the weight of his message. Children joined him on stage, looking up at him with practiced adoration. The gospel choir added layers of spiritual resonance. The performance built and built, growing in intensity, the music and visuals designed to overwhelm the senses and touch something deep within the audience. Michael's face glistened with genuine tears as he moved through the choreography. This wasn't just performance for him. It was purpose. His concern for the Earth's future, for children's welfare, for humanity's path. These weren't publicity angles, but deeply held convictions. The audience sat transfixed, many moved by the spectacle, others perhaps questioning its theatrical excess. In the music industry, Michael's tendency toward grandiose statements was well known, both admired and occasionally mocked. But regardless of one's perspective, there was no denying the sheer scale and ambition of what was unfolding on stage. As the performance reached its crescendo, Michael stood elevated above the stage, arms outstretched, bathed in golden light. The visual metaphor was unmistakable, a savior figure, offering redemption through music and message. The choir's voices reached fever pitch. The children gazed upward. The dancers enacted scenes of healing and revival. It was at this precise moment, this peak of carefully orchestrated emotion, that something entirely unplanned occurred. A lanky figure in a rumpled brown suit suddenly appeared at the edge of the stage. Jarvis Cocker, the frontman of Pulp, a band that embodied the earthier, more ironic sensibilities of Britpop, had been watching the performance with increasing discomfort. Where some saw sincere expression, Cocker saw pretension. Where some were moved by the messianic imagery, he felt provoked. Without warning, without planning, guided by impulse and perhaps the effects of pre-ceremony drinks, Cocker made his move. He loped onto the stage with deliberate casualness, a stark contrast to the choreographed intensity surrounding him. The audience gasped. Camera operators, unsure if this was part of the act, swung their lenses to capture this unexpected development. Cocker turned to face the audience, his back to Jackson. He lifted his shirt, bent over slightly, and made mocking gestures, waving his arms in a parody of Jackson's performance style. The disruption lasted only seconds before security personnel rushed toward him. But those seconds stretched into an eternity for everyone witnessing it, in the venue and through television screens across Britain. The gospel choir faltered momentarily. The children looked confused. The dancers hesitated. But Michael, still elevated above the stage, continued his performance with professional focus, though his eyes had registered the intrusion. Security guards grasped Cocker firmly, escorting him off stage with efficiency but not without struggle. His lanky frame resisted, not violently, but with the passive weight of protest. The audience reaction was immediate and mixed: shock, nervous laughter, disapproval, and from some corners, a hint of appreciation for the irreverent puncturing of such earnestness. In the press section, journalists furiously scribbled notes, knowing they had just witnessed a moment that would dominate the next day's headlines. This wasn't just a disruption, it was a collision of opposing artistic philosophies, played out in front of millions. The performance continued. Michael Jackson, ever the consummate professional, did not stop, did not acknowledge the interruption, did not let the moment derail his vision. The choir regained its harmony. The dancers returned to their choreography. But something had shifted in the atmosphere. The spell had been broken. What had been a moment of pure theatrical emotion now carried a layer of unexpected reality, the polished veneer cracked by Cocker's intrusion. As the song concluded, the audience applause seemed uncertain, a mixture of appreciation for the performance and reaction to the disruption. Backstage, chaos erupted. Security personnel surrounded Cocker, who was now being accused of something far more serious than mere disruption. There were claims that during his stage invasion, he had struck some of the children performing with Jackson. Police were called. Statements were taken. The BRIT Awards continued on stage, but behind the scenes, a legal drama was beginning to unfold. In the press room, the incident already overshadowed the award winners. The collision between Jackson and Cocker had become the story of the night, a clash between American spectacle and British irreverence, between earnest messaging and cynical rejection. Michael Jackson retreated to his dressing room, surrounded by his entourage. The emotional investment he had put into the performance, now compounded by this public disrespect. Those close to him expected anger, anticipated outrage. How would the king of pop respond to such a deliberate act of mockery on one of the biggest stages in music? His team braced for instructions, for demands that Cocker be prosecuted to the fullest extent, for statements condemning the act. But something unexpected happened in that dressing room. Michael Jackson, after a long silence, asked questions. He wanted to understand who this person was, what had motivated the disruption. His curiosity seemed genuine, not merely strategic. When told about Jarvis Cocker, about Pulp, about the Britpop scene and its often cynical stance toward perceived inauthenticity, Jackson listened with thoughtful attention. Those present remembered the moment vividly. How Jackson sat very still, his expression impossible to read behind a surgical mask he often wore in public spaces. One aide suggested immediate legal action. Another wanted a public statement expressing outrage. Public relations experts began drafting condemnations. Michael raised his hand, a simple gesture that immediately silenced the room. His voice, so powerful on stage, was characteristically soft as he spoke. "He has his view," Michael said. "Everyone is entitled to their opinion." The room fell into stunned silence. This was not the reaction anyone had anticipated from an artist known for controlling his image with meticulous care, from a superstar who commanded respect through decades of unparalleled success. Michael continued, musing almost in himself about how art should provoke reaction, even when that reaction wasn't what the artist intended. He spoke about his own journey, about criticism he had faced, about the loneliness of standing on the world stage. If this story moves you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more authentic stories about Michael and the moments that defined his extraordinary life. The night wore on. The BRIT Awards concluded. Artists celebrated at after-parties across London. But the story was still unfolding. In the early hours of the morning, Jarvis Cocker was released from police custody. No charges would be filed. Investigations had revealed that claims of him striking children were unfounded. Video footage showed clear disruption but no violence. As dawn broke over London, news crews stationed themselves outside the exclusive hotel where Michael Jackson was staying, anticipating a statement, perhaps even an impromptu press conference where the king of pop would express his justified outrage. Instead, something entirely different occurred. A spokesperson for Jackson emerged from the hotel, distributing a carefully worded statement. Journalists tore open the envelopes, cameras ready to capture the condemnation. But the statement they read defied expectations. Michael expressed regret that his performance had been disrupted, but emphasized that he held no personal ill will toward Cocker. He stated that he respected artistic expression in all its forms, even when it took the shape of criticism directed at him. The statement expressed concern that the incident had distracted from the charitable and environmental message of his song, but contained no attacks, no threats of legal action, no demands for apology. The press was dumbfounded. This measured, magnanimous response seemed incongruous with the public persona of Michael Jackson that had been constructed in tabloids. Where was the diva demanding retribution? Where was the isolated superstar surrounding himself with yes-men who reinforced his outrage? The statement concluded with Jackson saying he hoped the incident would open dialogue about how artists communicate important messages and how audiences receive them. It was thoughtful, nuanced, unexpected. In the days that followed, the incident became a cultural touchpoint. Jarvis Cocker was alternately hailed as a hero of authenticity and condemned as a disrespectful saboteur. On British television and radio, debates raged about the line between artistic expression and simple bad behavior. Music industry figures took sides. The video of the incident was replayed countless times, analyzed like the Zapruder film, with commentators parsing every gesture, every reaction. But through all this media circus, Michael Jackson maintained his dignified silence, letting his initial statement stand without elaboration. A week after the BRIT Awards, something remarkable happened. A British music magazine published an extensive interview with Jackson, conducted just before he left London. The interviewer, expecting to be given strict instructions to avoid the Jarvis Cocker incident, was surprised when Jackson himself brought it up. With thoughtful candor, Michael reflected on the moment. He acknowledged that his performance style could sometimes come across as grandiose to British sensibilities. He spoke about cultural differences in how emotion is expressed, about his own background in American soul, gospel, and pop traditions that embraced big gestures and open emotionality. Most surprisingly, Michael expressed a kind of respect for the impulse behind Cocker's action, if not the action itself. He said he had always admired artists who stood by their convictions, who refused to conform. Wasn't that, after all, what he himself had done throughout his career? Breaking barriers, defying expectations, following his own vision even when it puzzled or provoked others. In the interview, Michael laughed softly, saying perhaps he and the Pulp frontman had more in common than either would readily admit. Both were, in their own ways, outsiders who had created their own artistic languages. The interview transformed the narrative. What had been a simple story of disruption and disrespect became something more complex, more human. It revealed a Michael Jackson many had forgotten existed. Thoughtful, self-aware, capable of perspective, and even gentle humor about himself. Fans shared the interview, surprised and moved by this glimpse of the man behind the iconic image. Some who had sided with Cocker found themselves reconsidering, not necessarily changing their view of the performance itself, but developing a newfound respect for Jackson's response to criticism. In a small London record shop, an employee remembers a quiet moment days after the controversy had begun to fade from headlines. A teenage girl purchasing Michael Jackson's album approached the counter, clutching the CD to her chest. When asked if she was a new fan, she shook her head. "I've always loved his music," she said, "but the way he handled that thing at the BRIT Awards, that's when I realized he's not just an amazing performer. He's a real person, you know." The employee nodded. It was a sentiment echoed in countless conversations that spring. Something about the incident and its aftermath had humanized the king of pop in a way that all the carefully orchestrated interviews and appearances never had. Jarvis Cocker eventually spoke about the incident too, his initial defiance softening over time into a more nuanced position. He stood by his critique of what he saw as the performance's messianic pretensions, but expressed a degree of regret about the method of his protest. In later interviews, he occasionally acknowledged Jackson's surprisingly gracious response, admitting it wasn't what he had expected. There was never a direct apology, never a reconciliation between the two artists, but there was a kind of mutual recognition across the divide. Two very different musicians who had collided at the BRIT Awards, and somehow both emerged with dignity intact. For Michael, the incident became part of the complex tapestry of his public life. Another moment where the extraordinary pressures of his fame and the intensity of his artistic vision created a situation that defied simple narratives. Those in his inner circle noted that he referenced the event occasionally in subsequent years, not with bitterness but with philosophical reflection. Once, while discussing a particularly harsh critic, he smiled and said, "At least he didn't jump on stage during my performance." It was this capacity for perspective, for seeing beyond the immediate reaction, that surprised and impressed those who worked closely with him. Years later, long after both that night at the BRIT Awards and Michael Jackson himself had passed into history, a small, unexpected connection emerged. At an auction of music memorabilia, a lot came up for sale that contained ephemera from the 1996 BRIT Awards, programs, backstage passes, and other items. Among them was a handwritten note on Earl's court exhibition center stationery. The note, authenticated by experts, was in Michael Jackson's distinctive handwriting. It read simply, "To Jarvis Cocker, I hope one day we can talk about music, art, and how to change the world. Respectfully, Michael Jackson." The note was never sent. Perhaps Michael thought better of the gesture. Perhaps advisors counseled against it. Perhaps it was simply forgotten in the whirlwind of that tour. The note sold for an astonishing sum, purchased by an anonymous collector. But before it disappeared into a private collection, photographs were published in music magazines and shared widely online. For fans of both artists, it represented something profound, a moment of potential connection that never materialized, a reminder of the complex humanity behind the public personas, a testament to the grace that can exist even in moments of conflict. The note became, in its way, as iconic as the stage invasion itself. Not the spectacle of confrontation, but the quiet possibility of understanding. In a museum dedicated to British music history, a small exhibit commemorates the 1996 BRIT Awards. Visitors can see footage of performances, photographs of winners with their trophies, costumes worn by presenters. In one corner, somewhat separate from the rest, a monitor plays the famous footage of Jarvis Cocker's stage invasion in an endless loop. Beside it, a framed copy of Michael Jackson's statement responding to the incident. Museum guides report that visitors often linger at this exhibit longer than any other, watching the footage repeatedly, reading the statement multiple times, trying to understand the collision of these two artistic worlds and what it revealed about both. One afternoon, a visitor asked a museum guide whether they thought Jackson had been genuinely unbothered by the disruption or if his measured response had been a calculated public relations move. The guide, an older woman who had worked in the music industry for decades, considered the question carefully. "I met Michael several times throughout his career," she finally said. "He was many things. Complex, contradictory, sometimes frustrating to those who worked with him. But if there was one consistent quality, it was his ability to surprise you just when you thought you had him figured out." His response to Jarvis wasn't what anyone expected. Maybe that was precisely the point. On quiet nights, when the museum is closed, that loop of footage continues to play in the darkened exhibit. The moment frozen in time. Jarvis Cocker bending forward, Michael Jackson with arms outstretched, the shocked faces of the audience, the confusion of the children on stage, the rush of security guards. A single instant that captured something essential about celebrity, about artistic expression, about the gap between intention and reception, about the human beings behind the public images. And perhaps most of all, about how grace can emerge from the most unexpected moments, revealing depths in those we thought we knew completely. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more authentic stories about Michael and the moments that shaped his extraordinary life and legacy. Your support helps us continue to share these powerful moments in music history. The King of Pop would perform many more times, would create more iconic moments, would continue to evolve as an artist and public figure. But for those who witnessed that night at the BRIT Awards, either in person or through the countless replays that would follow, there would always be something revealing about how Michael Jackson responded when the carefully constructed performance was disrupted by raw reality. Not with the outrage that his status might have justified, not with the legal consequences his power could have demanded, but with a kind of thoughtful grace that acknowledged the humanity on both sides of the divide. Perhaps that, as much as any song or dance move, any album or video, revealed something essential about the man behind the legend. His capacity to rise above, to understand, to find perspective even when standing at the center of the storm.